Hey YouTube, Awesome Rider here. Welcome to another ranking video. The Boom Comics recently wrapped up their main comic story that we've been following for over 5 years now? 7 years. It's been a while. It's been a long time. I think over 5 years works. Anyway, I got distracted by my own idiocy there. But in honor of that, even though we are continuing the comics, there's going to be a new ongoing series and some new one-shots, but in honor of this overall era, I'm going to be doing a series of ranking videos about Boom Comics that I'm going to be sprinkling throughout my schedule, through all my other series of videos, starting with this one where I'm going to be ranking all the major comic arcs. I kind of consolidated these into the most major significant arcs, and I also roped in anything that would be involved in it, meaning like, for example, with Darkest Hour, the Recharged era and arc led directly into that, so I consider that to be part of the overall arc. I know Darkest Hour was a distinct arc, but I included anything that was a sort of lead up to it or enhanced it, just to kind of rank the overall era of stories. And I tried to keep it at the biggest stories possible. There's a couple little mini arcs that got left by the wayside because I wanted to distill it down to the biggest arcs and eras. And you know, if you have a problem with that approach, I do have a permit. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Unfortunately, at the bottom of the list, because I do kind of have a soft spot for it and I think it gets too much hate for its cool ideas, is the Beyond the Grid arc. You know, this was actually really cool when it happened. The idea that we would get to explore non-mmpr Rangers, especially a unique team in this unique setting, in this sort of gap between Shattered Grid and what came next, which was Necessary Evil. The overall idea was so cool, and that's the thing about it, is I think the biggest positives are the ideas. And I struggled whether to rank this or the one above it in their positions because there's things I like about this more than the number 7 pick, but the thing that held this back ultimately was the really strange writing for it. Like, the pacing was very strange. It didn't leave you a lot of time to be invested in things. It felt like kind of a bullet point list. It felt like things just kind of rushed to a conclusion. And also the character dialogue was very strange. Like, I usually don't call that out. I think people talk about that too often. That it's bad writing, it's bad dialogue. I'm like, who the hell are you? I think that's thrown around too much, but it definitely, at least for me, felt weird. Like, I remember distinctly a scene, I think it was like with Ranger Slayer and Dark Ranger and maybe a couple others, and they were like, guys, I did really like some bad stuff. And it was just like really weirdly on the nose and felt like middle schoolers were writing it. Not all the time, just some of the dialogue. And there was just this off presentation about it, and again, this just lack of investment. And most of the positives for this arc for me just came down to loving all the ideas. Loved the idea of Beyond the Grid team. Loved the idea of being stranded in this dimension that has the Zeo Crystal Planet origins, because the Zeo Crystal Planet was cut off. Praetor was a cool villain. The Solar Ranger was a cool character, was a cool idea. The Solar Rangers at the end, where they all kind of have these echoes of their previous powers. Like, so this is a good one in terms of the mythology, and I'm glad they made use of it later, but it was just the presentation, and that's why I had to rank it last, because everything I like about it is just a checkpoint of all the things they added onto the mythology. At number 7 is the Unlimited Power arc / the new Green Ranger arc, and I forgot to mention at the top of this is encompassing the whole run of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, including when it split off into Mighty Morphin and Power Rangers. And some of them do include some overflow from Go-Go, but Go-Go's arcs aren't generally covered in this, but you'll see what I mean when I get there. But this was primarily on the mmpr side, revolving around the story arc with the new Green Ranger, the Mystery Identity. And this is another one where, very similar to Beyond the Grid, a lot of what I like about it is the ideas they introduced, but the execution wasn't always so great. But it got a little bit of a higher bump simply because I do think there was a little bit more investment for me, a little bit more payoff, even though they didn't dig as deep into the things they introduced. I did feel more engaged with it. I felt like I was enjoying it more, and they had so many more nice moments and character moments, whereas like I said with the other one, all I remember is the checklist of lore. Like, when this was first announced that we were getting a new Green Ranger, initially I rolled my eyes. I'm like, can we move on from this? Like, I'm totally fine of us using mmpr forever, but we were moving into the White Ranger era. And that's one thing that definitely frustrates me, is I know Green Ranger is the most popular, but I don't see why putting White Ranger front and center would be a risk. He was in the movie, for God's sake. So I was like excited for, like, if we're doing any Tommy focus, for it to be more White Ranger leaning. And I was a little bit annoyed, like, okay, we had to bring back the Green Ranger. But then as we went on, it became kind of fun to speculate who it was going to be. Is it going to be Draken? Is it going to be Matt? Bombshell announcement, guys. It's not Matt. It's Kylo Ren. So that ended up being kind of fun, and I actually really enjoyed the first arc where we didn't know who he was. I'm a sucker for a Mystery Ranger arc like the Gold Ranger, the Phantom Ranger, or those 5 minutes when they didn't know who Super Mega Force Silver was. So I just enjoyed that, and I enjoyed all the parallels they drew between Grace creating her own Green Ranger and, you know, Rita and the Green Ranger, Billy's betrayal arc, the idea of a publicly out Ranger, these sort of competing ideologies between the Green Ranger and Grace and the core team, you know, that whole arc where they were trapped under the dome and they had to work with Zed. There was a lot of really cool cool moments and ideas, and the only reason it's held back is because I feel they didn't spend enough time on them. Like, it ultimately came to a head when they all had to work together, and the Green Ranger and the White Ranger and all of them made peace, and then eventually they started working together. But I think in the longer run of the comics, having the Green Ranger and Grace being the separate entity that maybe will sometimes have to work with them, but has conflicting ideologies, I think would have been something worth exploring more in the long term. It felt like that idea was swept under the rug very quickly. Same thing with the Under the Dome arc. I felt that was very quickly just rushed. In fact, the only thing that really lasted around, other than the fact that Matt still existed and his relationship with Grace a little bit near her end, was Billy's betrayal. And I do feel it got a little bit more time to enjoy some of these elements compared to Beyond the Grid, which was just a checklist. But I still wish we would have spent more time on this stuff because there was a lot of cool ideas here. After that, at number 6 is the most recent Darkest Hour event, and I'll see if this moves up or down after an eventual reread. And I did really like this arc, and something I talked about over the course of all my reviews, that one of my consistent favorite things about it was that it really took advantage of almost everything that had been introduced before, including stuff that wasn't as popular, like Beyond the Grid or Power Rangers Universe. I appreciated that. I don't like when people will just throw things away that were written because the fans didn't like it. I like that they embraced everything and made use of it all in a mostly cohesive way. I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the lead up to it and what they did with Rita's character in Recharged. Some of the stuff with Matt almost being kind of meta, because I feel like after the arc I just talked about with the Green Ranger, after we had his identity outed, it felt like Matt was left by the wayside. And they kind of made that meta, and that's how he felt, of course, initially, because he felt left out when the other Rangers were, well, Rangers and he wasn't. But it felt like a part of his character naturally, but also a little bit meta. Yet again, rolling my eyes when they did Evil Green Ranger, but it wound up being kind of cool, because unlike Tommy, who, when he initially turned evil, obviously had no motivation, he was just initially put under a spell, Matt had some underlying anger and reasoning to be an evil Green Ranger, and that actually wound up being pretty cool. I still kind of wish they didn't do it, but it wound up proving me wrong mostly. I actually think I enjoyed the build-up to Darkest Hour more than the actual event. Like, I did enjoy a lot in the event. I'm glad we got to follow up with the Hyperforce Rangers. I loved the design of the Darker Rangers. I like some of the stuff they did with Draken and the Emissaries, but it definitely felt like a messier affair. It definitely felt like they lost the plot at the end and they had too many moving pieces. So even though I enjoyed it overall, I think it dropped the ball just a little bit. We'll see how I feel upon a revisit when I'm able to sort of take my time and I don't have to review everything back to back. Next up, the Altarian War. This is an arc I see get a lot of hate, and I understand some mixed opinions on it, but for the most part I kind of enjoyed this one. I do feel that the Imperials were wasted, and I almost am curious how the Imperials mythology fits into the new origin for the Emissaries. I imagine it's because the Emissaries were created out of life, which is the morphing grid, that the Emissaries were the balance of destruction, but whatever. Regardless, I liked the Imperials in terms of their idea, and I think their build-up was right, but then they kind of got lost when they announced oh, we're doing the Altarian stuff, and the Altarians, specifically Zardes or whatever his name was in control of them. I almost wish those were two separate things, because I feel there was all this build-up for them to just be like animals on a chain, but there were still some cool ideas there. I loved the build-up of it. I loved the arc where you had Jason's team going against going against Zordon because they were breaking out Tommy, Draken, and I thought that was really cool, and that conflict with Billy, and there was all kinds of character drama there, all kinds of great build-up there. I loved the further fleshing out of the backstory of Eltar and Zordon's friends, and getting to explore the backstory of Lord Zed. I thought that was really cool. There was definitely a little bit of clunk, some issues I had, but I overall thought this was actually a pretty awesome arc that kept me engaged and introduced a lot of cool story ideas and lore. Following that up with the original Black Dragon arc, and this also includes effectively the very beginning of the comic that led right into this, because the first arc of the comic is effectively the aftermath of Tommy joining the team and showing it realistically. This is what hooked me. When these comics first came out, it was more mmpr. I had read a couple of the paper cuts ones. I wasn't that into it. I'm like, I'll get to it eventually. But then I was blown away, and this was before I even got to the Draken stuff, to see these characters, versions of these characters, actually behave like human beings. Well-written characters with actual conflict and apprehension about Tommy and mistrust. It was really interesting, and it rolled beautifully into the Black Dragon arc, where then they're encountering this creature that has green chaos energy signatures, so they're like, maybe it's related to Tommy, maybe he's going to betray us again. And then, of course, to the big reveal of Draken, which is such a great Elseworlds comic booky storyline, and meeting a version of Tommy that stayed evil, this counterpart post-apocalyptic world with the Ranger Sentries and the Resistance Fighters. Such a cool comic booky story, and the exact type of stories I want to see out of the Power Rangers universe, and it was just such a great first memorable arc for the series. Coming in at number 3 is the Death Ranger arc. I really enjoyed this one. A lot of it coming down to the Death Ranger character. I really liked their character a lot. Just the concept of a very Marvel Zombies looking character that can resurrect the dead is cool. His design is cool. I like the Omega designs, but to have a Golden Skull Zombie one just furthers that. The idea of them is just so cool. Like the idea of this character that is part of a hive mind, and so they have a hard time like adjusting to being a lone person, but yet they're also a part of a team, but it's in a different way than being part of a hive mind. Then also not being able to understand death because like death isn't the end for them. They're like a species where they know there's like an afterlife because of like this hive mind thing. So seeing how that developed their character was so interesting, and them exploring like what it meant to Andros about death and trying to bring people back. The fact that the Omegas charging their new mission brought the Death Ranger to them, getting to see him take over all these other Rangers and get these sick designs. I thought it was a really cool arc and a really satisfying end to the era. It's funny thinking back, I talked about in my review for Darkest Hour how I felt the last panel of Shattered Grid would be a more satisfying finale, but I forgot if the comics had ended their run here, this would have been fairly satisfying too. It was a nice stopping place for both the Omegas and the main team, and it was a really well done arc. Runner up though is Necessary Evil. This was really cool. I like the idea that after Shattered Grid you kind of have like almost a New 52-esque thing going on where you have a new version of the universe and you can play with things a little bit. Probably the coolest thing being creating an actual legit storyline and covert Omega Rangers team out of the peace conference, which was created because of behind-the-scenes drama back in the day. That was really cool to see. This is the only one that incorporates Go-Go because they incorporated Go-Go into the storyline, but it was really cool to see that, to see the slow transition of the Omega Rangers, their initial story, the build-up with Kia as a villain. I liked Kia as a villain. I know that the idea of a character thinking the heroes are the problem, whether it's like the Jedi or the superheroes, isn't new, but it is new to Power Rangers, and the idea of this character kind of having this Shattered Grid vision after seeing White Ranger Tommy and thinking it's Draken and causing her to snap, and I thought that was really cool. And also, underrated part of this was seeing how Tommy actually struggled to take over as leader with this new lineup of Rangers. Because in the show, it's all kumbaya and everything's fine, Jason, Zach, and Trini who. But this actually showed that it was a difficult transition, both for Tommy mastering this new power, mastering becoming a leader, but also dealing with a new team lineup. But for me, number 1 is definitely Shattered Grid. This was such a great event, such great build-up from that Black Dragon arc, you know, such a great event for the anniversary at the time. You know how I feel about anniversary stuff, but this was just so great because it was definitely much more concise with a much more consistent build-up, some great cameos and interactions, but none of it felt too forced or messy. It felt like there was a consistent build-up to what came next and to the escalating conflict, to the ultimate resolution with Draken. And I love how the final issue, too, was very character-driven. It actually was about Draken's character and kind of why he made that decision, and he even gets a chance to, you know, possibly make good on it at the end, and he doesn't. And I thought that was really cool, because you had the final battle at the end of the arc, but then the one-shot was this very character-driven, self-contained thing, and it was just a really well-drawn arc that felt like the culmination of the pinnacle of the comics, and was just such a great celebration of the anniversary year at the time. But that is just my list. Let me know your guys' rankings of the arcs in the Boom comics. Let me know in the comments as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps, ring that bell to get notifications for my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.